All right, let's dive into this deep dive on norovirus. I think a lot of people hear norovirus and they just think cruise ships, but there's so much more to it, and I think you're definitely going to help us get a better understanding of this virus so that people can stay healthy and informed.
Yeah, definitely. I think most people have probably experienced norovirus at some point in their lives. It's not just a stomach bug, it's actually a virus that specifically targets your gastrointestinal tract.
Oh, so it's not just like I ate something bad or, a 24-hour bug.
Right, exactly. And we're going to talk about the symptoms and how sometimes they can be a little tricky to diagnose.
Interesting. Okay, so um, what's something that might surprise our listeners about this virus?
Well, the CDC tracks over 2,000 norovirus outbreaks every year in the U.S. alone.
Wow, that's a huge number.
It is, yeah, so it's more common than you might think.
So yeah, it sounds like we've probably all encountered this virus more than we realize.
Probably.
Okay, so let's get into it. Like, what are the symptoms when we talk about norovirus?
So you're probably familiar with the classic food poisoning symptoms, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea.
Right.
But norovirus can also cause fever and body aches, so people often mistake it for other viruses.
Oh, so it's not always easy to tell if you have norovirus or just a regular cold or flu.
Exactly, and there's no specific test for norovirus, so it can be tough to diagnose.
Okay, well that makes it even trickier.
Yeah.
So if it's so common, how does it spread so easily? Like, where should our listeners be most cautious about encountering this?
You're right, it is very contagious, and those cruise ship outbreaks you hear about, well, they actually account for less than 2% of all cases each year.
Really, only 2%?
Yeah, so you're much more likely to encounter norovirus in places like offices, schools, restaurants, really any shared space where people are in close proximity and touching surfaces.
That makes sense. So it's really about being mindful of hygiene in any public space.
Exactly.
Okay, well, speaking of hygiene, I have to ask, what about hand sanitizer? Is that enough to protect against norovirus?
Unfortunately, hand sanitizer isn't as effective against norovirus as it is with other germs.
Really?
Yeah, it has a tough outer shell that makes it resistant to many common disinfectants.
So even though I feel like I'm, being safe using hand sanitizer all the time,
Mm.
that's not going to cut it with norovirus.
Not necessarily.
Okay, well, so what's the best way to protect myself then?
Good old-fashioned soap and water, that's your best defense.
Really? Even better than hand
For
sanitizer?
norovirus, yes.
Wow. Okay, well, I guess sometimes the simplest solutions are the best.
Absolutely. And when you wash your hands, make sure you're really scrubbing them thoroughly for at least 20 seconds.
20 seconds, okay.
Yeah, that friction and the physical act of washing are really key to removing this virus.
All right, I'm going to have to time myself next time I wash my hands.
Mhm.
Make sure I'm doing it for the full 20 seconds.
It's worth it.
So prevention is key. But what if you do get sick? What's the best way to manage those norovirus symptoms?
Well, the good news is that norovirus is usually self-limiting, which means it typically runs its course within a few days.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
Yeah, so most people can recover at home with rest and hydration.
I mean, it's still miserable to go through, but at least it's not a long-term thing.
Right. But it is important to stay home and avoid contact with others if you're sick.
Yeah, of course, you don't want to spread it around.
Exactly.
But I imagine with all the vomiting and diarrhea, dehydration is a real concern.
Absolutely.
So when should someone actually seek medical attention for norovirus?
So while most healthy adults can manage symptoms at home, the very young, the elderly, and those with compromised immune systems are more susceptible to complications from dehydration.
Okay, that makes sense.
So they may need medical intervention like IV fluids.
So it's important to be aware of those risk factors and know when to seek help.
Definitely.
So we've talked about the personal impact of norovirus, like the symptoms and how to prevent it. But it's not just about, a few days of feeling miserable.
Right.
There's actually a much bigger picture here when you consider the economic burden of this virus.
Yeah, absolutely. Think about all the missed work and school days, the strain on healthcare systems.
Yeah, it's not just a personal inconvenience, it's really impacting society as a whole.
Exactly. And the CDC actually estimates that norovirus costs the U.S. economy billions of dollars every year.
Wow, billions with a B.
Yeah,
That's a staggering impact for a virus that, doesn't always get a lot of attention.
it often flies under the radar.
Okay, so billions of dollars, what contributes to those costs?
Well, it's a combination of factors. You have healthcare expenses, lost productivity from sick workers, the resources needed to contain outbreaks.
Hmm.
It all adds up.
Yeah, it makes sense when you break it down like that.
Yeah.
So given those huge costs, it's no surprise that scientists are working hard to find ways to fight norovirus, right?
Oh, definitely.
Are there any promising developments on the horizon?
Well, there's been a lot of research on vaccine development.
Oh, wow.
Several potential vaccines are being tested in clinical trials.
Really?
Yeah, and the results so far have been pretty encouraging.
Okay, so it's still early, but there's hope for a vaccine.
There's hope.
That would be a game changer.
It would.
But I have to ask, how realistic is a vaccine given how quickly this virus mutates?
That's a great question, and it's definitely one of the biggest challenges in developing a norovirus vaccine.
Yeah.
It's constantly evolving.
Like a moving target.
It is, and that makes it hard to create a vaccine that's going to provide long-lasting protection.
So how are researchers trying to overcome that challenge?
Well, they're focusing on identifying parts of the virus that don't mutate as quickly
Okay.
and targeting those in vaccine development.
That's interesting. So they're trying to find the weak spots, the parts that stay the same.
Right.
Well, let's hope they're successful, but in the meantime, we still have to rely on the good old-fashioned prevention methods.
Absolutely. Hand washing, as we discussed, is paramount.
Yeah, the 20-second scrub.
Exactly. And staying home when you're sick, that's also crucial to prevent spreading the virus.
Right, those simple actions really can make a big difference. We've all seen how quickly viruses can spread, especially in close quarters.
Yeah.
So why is norovirus so incredibly contagious?
Well, it only takes a tiny amount of the virus to cause an infection.
Really? Like how tiny are we talking?
We're talking minuscule. You can't even see it with the naked eye.
Wow.
And even a brief touch of a contaminated surface can be enough to get you sick.
It's like it's lurking everywhere, just waiting to strike.
Yeah, and to make matters worse, it's a survivor. It can live on surfaces for days or even weeks.
Oh, wow. So this is a tough virus to beat.
It is.
It makes sense why it's so hard to contain outbreaks.
Yeah.
Another thing I've always wondered about is why some people seem to get hit so much harder by norovirus than others.
Okay.
Is it just luck of the draw, or is there something else going on?
There are definitely a few factors at play. Genetics plays a role, for sure.
Okay, so some people are just predisposed to more severe symptoms.
Unfortunately, yes, that's the case with many illnesses.
Okay, so genetics isn't the whole story?
Mm.
What else can influence how sick you get?
Your overall health and immune system play a big role, too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So if your immune system is weakened, you're more likely to have a rougher time with norovirus.
Okay, so taking care of yourself, eating well, getting enough sleep, all of that contributes to fighting off the virus.
Absolutely. A healthy immune system is your best defense.
So it's not just about avoiding germs, it's about being healthy overall.
Right.
Okay, we've talked about prevention symptoms, even the economic impact, but I'm curious about the cellular level.
Okay.
How does this tiny virus actually invade our bodies and make us sick?
Yeah.
Can you walk us through that process?
Sure. So imagine the norovirus as like a microscopic key searching for a lock.
Okay.
It finds its match on the surface of cells that line your intestines.
So it's not just floating around our stomachs causing general havoc.
Oh.
It's actually attacking to specific cells.
Right.
That's fascinating.
And once it binds to a cell, it releases its genetic material inside, basically hijacking the cell's machinery and forcing it to create more virus particles.
It's like a hostile takeover at the cellular level.
You could say that.
So what happens next?
Well, these new virus particles, they multiply rapidly within the cell, and eventually they cause it to burst open and release even more viruses into your system.
Oh, wow. So it's like a chain reaction happening inside of us.
Exactly, and then these new viruses go on to infect even more cells, so the cycle continues.
That's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Yeah.
But if our bodies are constantly fighting off these invaders, why do we still get sick?
Okay.
Shouldn't our immune system learn to recognize and eliminate the virus?
It would be nice if it were that simple, but the problem is that norovirus is constantly mutating.
Oh, right.
It's always evolving into new strains, so it's hard for our immune system to keep up.
So it's like the virus is constantly changing its disguise.
Exactly.
And our immune system is playing catch up.
Right.
So it's a never-ending battle.
It is, and that's why it's so important to stay informed about new strains and outbreaks, and also why research into vaccines and treatments is ongoing.
It really is a complex relationship between our bodies and these viruses.
It is.
You know, it's not just about avoiding germs. It's about understanding how our bodies interact with them, how they evolve, and how we can stay one step ahead.
I agree. It's a fascinating field, and one that's always changing as we learn more about these, microscopic but powerful organisms.
It's amazing how much impact something so small can have.
It is.
We've covered a lot in this segment, from the economic impact to the cellular mechanisms of norovirus.
We have?
Before we wrap things up, I have one more question.
Okay.
What about the long-term effects of norovirus? Are there any lingering consequences after you've recovered from that initial infection?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think one that a lot of people don't really think about.
Right, and it's an area where more research is definitely needed.
So what do we know so far?
Well, most people recover fully from norovirus, but in some cases there can be long-term complications.
Really, like what kind of complication? Some people report having like persistent gastrointestinal issues even after the initial infection is gone, things like irritable bowel syndrome or even lactose intolerance.
Wow. So even though we think of norovirus as, short-term illness, a few days of misery, it can actually have a lasting impact for some people.
Yeah,
That's pretty scary.
it is, and it just highlights how much we still don't know about this virus.
Yeah, there's always more to learn.
Always.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about cleaning, because we know prevention is key. But let's say someone in your household does come down with norovirus.
Okay.
What's the best way to clean and disinfect to prevent it from spreading to everyone else in the family?
Yeah, that's crucial. And it's important to remember that not all disinfectants are created equal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just like those alcohol-based hand sanitizers aren't very effective against norovirus, a lot of regular household cleaners won't do the trick either.
So you're saying my go-to all-purpose cleaner might not be enough.
Probably not.
Okay, so what should we be using then?
You need to look for EPA-registered disinfectants that specifically say norovirus on the label.
Okay, so read the label carefully.
Yes, because those products have actually been tested and proven to work against this virus.
So we have to be more targeted in our cleaning approach.
Exactly.
All right, so what else should our listeners keep in mind when they're cleaning up after a norovirus outbreak?
Well, pay close attention to high-touch surfaces, things like doorknobs, light switches, countertops, faucets, anything that the sick person might have touched.
Right. Makes sense.
And don't forget about laundry.
Yeah.
Any contaminated clothing or bedding should be washed separately in hot water with detergent.
Okay, so it's a full court press when it comes to cleaning and disinfecting.
Yeah, it's worth the effort, though.
It is better safe than sorry.
Exactly.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into norovirus, from myth-busting to prevention, the economic impact, even down to the cellular level.
It's been a pretty comprehensive look.
It has, and I hope our listeners are feeling more informed and empowered to protect themselves.
Me too.
Now, before we sign off, I'd like to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay.
We've talked about how contagious norovirus is and how quickly it can spread,
Yeah.
especially in today's world.
Yeah.
We're also interconnected.
Right.
So think about how our understanding of hygiene and sanitation has evolved over time.
Okay.
From basic hand washing to these, sophisticated disinfectants, we've come a long way.
Yeah.
But as viruses like norovirus continue to mutate and adapt, will our current methods be enough to keep us safe in the future?
That's a really good question. And, it underscores the need for ongoing research, public health awareness, and individual responsibility. We all had a role to play in protecting ourselves and our communities from these threats.
That's a great point and a perfect note to end on.
Yeah.
So to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of norovirus. Until next time, stay curious, wash your hands thoroughly, and stay healthy.